welcome you to today's webinar, Growth in the Contingent Workforce. My name is David Goodstein, and I'm the webinar coordinator for the Outsourcing Institute. It is our pleasure to be the co-host of today's event with Allegis Group Services. I'll be working in the background to help answer any technical or general questions that you may have. Before we begin today's session, I'd like to quickly tell you about a few tools you're able to use throughout today's session. We encourage you at any time during the presentation to submit your question to today's speakers. To do so, click on the questions box, type your question in the space provided, and click the submit button. This webinar is being recorded. You will be receiving a follow-up email in approximately 2 days, which will include a link with today's recorded webinar and presentation slides. The webinar recording and presentation slides will also be available at outsourcing.com. Before we begin, I'd like to quickly tell you about the Outsourcing Institute for those who aren't familiar with us. The Outsourcing Institute is a professional association dedicated to providing independent best practices, tools, roadshow events, and networking opportunities for all forms of outsourcing. Located at outsourcing.com, we have 70,000 members globally. OI specializes in providing low-cost and no-cost alternatives for outsourcing buyers in need of RFP tools, vendor selection assistance, training, as well as general support and coaching. For those of you who are in this market, we offer an array of very targeted sponsorship and promotional opportunities. Our sister company, CMS, provides recruiting services for those seeking to hire outsourced professionals experienced at buying, selling, managing, or consulting in this arena. Our contact information is at the bottom of the screen for those who have any questions. So at this time, I'd like to turn it over to our moderator, Rakesh Sangani. He's the Partner Advisory at Proservartner, and to begin the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. And hello to all of you that's joined this webinar. I'd like to just quickly introduce myself. I'm a partner at a business advisory company called Proservartner, where we specialize in outsourcing and shared services advisory. I'm happy to announce that we have both Dave Barthel and Ronald Kreugel with us from Allegis. Dave is an executive director within the Human Capital Solutions division of the company, and Ronald is Director of Business Development. I'm going to hand over to the two capable individuals to really talk through today's topic, which is around the growth of the contingent workforce, a fascinating examination of the trends and how the contingent workforce model is changing and what it means for each of you. I'll hand over to Dave to talk us through some of the content today. Dave.
Great. Thank you very much, Rakesh. I really appreciate it. And thank you, everybody, for joining. We're excited to speak with you today. Again, my name's Dave Barthel. I'm not sure who put my dad's picture on the presentation, but it's very funny. I've been with the Allegis family for about 18 years now, and my role is really working with our customers through solution design, working with our operations team and our implementation team to ensure consistency throughout the process. And we'll get into what we do a little bit, but our focus is on human capital solutions. So with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague and friend, Ronald.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Rakesh. Thanks for the introduction, and welcome everyone to this webinar today. My name is Ronald Kreugel. I'm Director of Business Development for Allegis Group Services within EMEA, and I bring in more than 50 years of international staffing and recruitment experiences, and having worked for large staffing companies such as Adecco, Video, Randstad. We bring in with Allegis now a lot of in-depth knowledge and expertise, MSP, RPO, VMS, and maybe we can introduce our company first to your organization. So Rakesh, maybe you can move to the next slide. For those who are not yet familiar with our organization, I would like to tell you who Allegis Group Services are and what we do. Founded in 2001, Allegis Group Services is part of the Allegis Group family, the world's largest privately held human capital solutions company. Over the years, our organization has designed, developed, and delivered global managed services, MSP solutions, for large multinationals in various regions of the world. And we currently have over 90 programs deployed in a wide range of industries. Besides MSP, we also deliver recruitment process outsourcing, RPO solutions, on a regional and global level to our customers, in order to help them find the best talent in the most effective way. Allegis Group Services are specialists in contingent workforce solutions, and also provide human capital advisory services and executive search through our company Allegis Partners. Our commitment to deliver world-class solutions and services comes from our founders who defined our purpose. It's really striving for excellence through servicing others. And we help our customers every day by finding them the talent they need. In 2012, we were recognized by Staffing Industry Analysts as overall top performer by buyers and suppliers in our industry, as well as our top performer MSP of 2012. We are extremely proud of our client retention rate, which is currently 100% since we started in 2001. And just a couple of days ago, HRO Today ranked us #1 on the MSP Baker's Dozen list of 2013. We are proud to sponsor today's Outsourcing Institute webinar, and next week we'll be attending the EMEA Contingent Workforce Summit 2013 on May 15th and 16th in Berlin, as well as the Pan-European HR Forum on May 22nd and May 23rd, also in Berlin. We look forward to meeting you there if you plan to attend one of these events. But let's get to the webinar for today.
And Ronald, just before we start the webinar, I'd just like everyone to know that we wanted to keep this as quite an engaging session. So please feel free to ask questions as we're going through the material. You have the functionality in front of you as part of the webinar tool that we're using to ask questions as we go through that. If we find relevant questions, we'll either ask them during the material or at the end. So please do bear with us. And back to you now, Ronald.
Thank you. Well, today's webinar's title is Growth of the Contingent Workforce, and Dave and I will share the thoughts of Allegis and our knowledge with you about the development of contingent labor over the years and what it has become today. But before we do that, perhaps it's good to have a look at the history of contingent labor. Actually, contingent workers have been around for much longer than people think. It all started a long, long time ago. For those attendants with a history major and study Roman Empire, maybe you should know this, but actually, back in the days of the old Romans, the army of the Roman emperors used mercenaries. Probably you will not immediately think of contingent labor as we know it today, but the armies used paid warriors who were recruited to fight for money. Most of them not even being Roman or having Roman roots, but for most of them it was a temporary job for which they got paid and hopefully get out of the fight alive to make some money and have a better life. To not turn this into a history class, we will skip a few centuries, and actually somewhere in the 1930s, the first private employment firms were founded. And actually the concept of temporary work got bigger after World War II, with small agencies in urban areas employing housewives for part-time work as office workers. Typically temporary workers were white women in pink-collar clerical positions who provided companies with a stopgap solution for permanent workers who needed a leave of absence or went on vacation or during illness. The business developed further in the 1970s when legislation for contingent labor was created in various countries, and in the 1990s the consolidation of the staffing industry started. Over the past decades we've seen and actually experienced large mergers and acquisitions which will likely continue to happen over the years to come. The staffing and recruitment industry is considered to be a relatively young industry, and consolidation is bound to happen in less mature industries. Besides industry consolidation, the staffing and recruitment industry as such has evolved, and contingent work today and in the future is much more than just the admin clerical temporary workers than there were years ago. And during this webinar, we will give you more insights to how this developed and what has become of the traditional temporary labor. Next slide. I think we all know that there's a lot happening in today's world and that we're going through a global transformation. For years now, it appears that the world is getting smaller and globalization is an ongoing trend, which I truly believe is unstoppable. New economies are emerging, and the BRIC countries are considered to have a significant impact on the global economy. When we look at the crisis in Europe, which is affecting the global economy as a whole, it seems that the gross domestic product, the GDP figures of the emerging countries indicate continued growth, while major economies are shrinking. Studies show that there will be large demographic changes coming over the next years, and an aging workforce, especially in Europe, will have its effect on organizations. The global population is still rapidly growing, but most in other parts of the world than Europe, simply have a look at India or China. It's really unbelievable how many graduates we can expect to have coming from those countries in the near future. And we believe it will have a serious impact on global organizations in need for specific skills and talents, and simply think of the workforce diversity and cultural change that's going to happen within those organizations. Last but not least, the impact of technology is going to be tremendous, and it's already tremendous. The speed of publishing, sharing, and finding information is truly amazing these days, and you really wonder how you were able to manage this flow of information BG, which is before Google. Mobile internet, mobile devices will become increasingly important and will let people have access whenever and wherever they want it. More people are bringing devices to the workplace, and social media is another unstoppable trend which will have its effects on organizations. Just think about Facebook, think about LinkedIn and other platforms, and they're already impacting the daily work of recruiters and HR. Next slide. So when we look at the global trends that we just saw on the previous slide, we expect to see a more diverse workforce today and certainly tomorrow, not only in terms of languages, nationalities, or cultures, but also in generations due to the aging workforce. Now, talking about generations, there are a lot of marketing studies that have tried their best to put labels and names in generations, but without trying to generalize every age group, we've copied the names and labels of the different generations. Why, you may ask? Well, it seems that everyone uses these names and labels anyway, so therefore it makes it easier to have a common understanding about the generations. Obvious names and labels such as baby boomers, Generation X and Y, the .com generation, and who knows what next generation will follow. The easiest way to name or label a generation would be to ask for, for age, but that could be very confrontational, and I would rather avoid any painful discussions about age. So let's start with common values, and we'll start with the top left box. We look at the matured generation rather than using senior or near to retirement, but this generation is known for values such as dedication for and willingness to sacrifice in order to get the job done or do an excellent job. I think we can all still remember words like head down, don't complain, and if you do a good job, you'll receive rewards for your performance. I believe this is still the case for many organizations where baby boomers and mature staff are fulfilling executive and senior positions, but some would also like to call it the old world or the old boys network. Probably these are the people of 55, 59, 60 years or older who grow up with duty, honor, patience, and the good times will come if you work hard enough. If you move to the baby boomers on the top right box, this generation is really known for work ethics. They really were all about work, all about career, and some would even say that this is the workaholic generation. Work fulfills them, and career focus is really comes into mind here. People between the age of 41, 59 years old, and I'm actually one of those, I think it's very recognizable. It was really about personal development. Growth is important. Whilst the rewards and visible successes can be shown, when you get them. If you then look at the generation X and Y on the bottom right box, it's actually a mixed generation. Some of the marketeers will disagree, but the 26 to 40-year-old people belong to this generation also have a lot of common values. Whereas the mature and baby boomer generation follow instructions or orders, the generation X and Y will question everything. Most of these were raised as their parents' friend, using the forenames, using the first names, and they were allowed, more to use it by names than using mom or dad. And we also refer to them as latchkey kids. While their parents, from the baby boomer generation were focused more on personal development and careers, the generation X and Y were really raised as individuals, also called the me generation. They've also witnessed the end of lifelong employment due to the economic downturns over the last decades, and they also realized that there's no job for life anymore, as the previous generations had for many, many years. The last group that I want to talk about is the bottom left box, is the millennials. And this generation of 25 or under, they were born in the late 90s and have grown up with technology, internet, and although raised as individuals, they're also very group-oriented. Although they've also probably seen the effects of economic crisis, they are still very optimistic, or should I say less concerned about the future. They're busy with lots of things, doing multiple things at the same time, and I see kids nowadays continuously using WhatsApp, Twitter, using other social media while doing other stuff at the same time. And social media has become a way of life for this generation and has an effect on the workplace as we know it today. So what does it all mean? What does it all mean for your organization? And what about your workforce and contingent labor? Well, most likely your workforce needs to adapt more rapidly to a fast-changing competitive environment. New generations think differently about work and careers. Their jobs are no longer a purpose for their life, and organizations need to be ready for significant workforce shifts. Go to the next.
Yeah, and Ronald, I think it's important to note it's important for a couple reasons. It's important so that you're managing these different generations within your organization effectively, but it's also important from an attraction standpoint. The position that somebody feels, in the newer generations looks a lot differently than in the matured generation. There really is no 40 years in a gold watch anymore, and we'll get into some of those differences, but it's important to note that it's not just how you manage the people, it's how you attract the people.
Thank you, Dave. Absolutely right. As with every new generation, there will come changes, and it's inevitable that new generations think differently about things they include into the workplace. Most of the workers are impacted by changes such as ongoing reorganization, restructuring exercises, and companies have to do that in order to deal with economic volatility. In a recent report that I read in MetLife's 10th anniversary survey of employee benefits, trends and attitudes, they put employee loyalty at a 7-year low. 1 in 3 employees, and this is probably a shock fact for some of you, the survey says plan to leave his or her job by the end of the year. And according to another report by Career Builder, 76% of full-time workers, while not actively looking for a new job, they would actually leave their current workplace if the right opportunity came along. Other studies show that each year the average company loses anywhere from 20 to 50% of its employee base. Is it shocking? No. It's really reality. And where the world of work is changing, we all know that, and we've seen it change over the years. Most of these changes happen gradually, and it took time, but I don't know how you feel. Maybe it's me getting older, but it seems that the speed of change is really increasing. Obviously, it's caused by what we already saw in the first slide, globalization, technology, but also the economic climate and the generation shift. I would really not like to call it a revolution, but I do believe that today's workplace will change. The workforce has already changed, and even though most organizations are still trying to hold on to their old business models and staff, things will certainly change for many of them. And for those of you familiar with McKinsey's War for Talent, well, it's still going on. It's not ending, despite of the increase of unemployment figures in many European countries or global countries, or slow growth of jobs in the United States. I do not want to be really pessimistic. I'm always being optimistic, so this is not the end of the world as we know it, but shift happens. And one of the examples I want to give you as well is in Japan, the lifetime employment system is really coming to an end there as well. Large electronic manufacturers such as Sony, Sharp, NEC, Panasonic, they all announced severe job cuts. And this also affects businesses, affiliated businesses who will need to scale down as well. Home electronics was a really, really attractive industry for young university graduates. But nowadays, these graduates are often more interested in positions in the public sector. And although the official unemployment rate in 2012 in Japan was 4.5%, young people realize that securing work is no longer equal to work security. Getting a job with an excellent company, such as the electronic manufacturers, does not guarantee a job for life anymore. So they believe that the public sector will get them that lifetime job, as the Japanese government has not seen any significant restructuring over the last years. A survey by the Japanese Institute for Labor Policy and Training of 4,000 20-year-old men and women showed that 87.5% will prioritize lifetime employment, as they call Shushin Koyo in Japan, when they look for the first job, and they look forward to age-based promotions and raises, which are very common in the old Japanese system. What can we learn from this? Well, the Japanese economy has been underperforming for many years. Despite government plans to inject more and more capital, the Japanese people are still reluctant and hesitant to spend their money, and the next generation of young people really don't seem to miss the water until the well goes dry.
And that's interesting, Ron. And if I could just ask a question. In terms of, you talked about the different generations and the shift in generations. Do you think that the mindset of the generations is due to just the age profile and how people have evolved over time? Or do you think it's due more to the economic conditions and organizations maybe being a little bit more abrupt in making decisions around hiring and firing people, and the lack of security related to that? So which do you think really drives the behaviors that we see from the different generations?
Well, in this case, I don't think there's a right or wrong answer, and probably both have an influence on this. Typically, what you see with the new generation, they've experienced, their parents working for 40 years in a company and then getting fired. For working for big multinationals in some cases. So they go like, well, I'm not going to do the same thing as my dad or mom did. I'm not going to work 40 years in the same company. I want to have purpose in life. And I think that's what we see with new generations. It's not just about the job anymore, whereas in the previous generation, my generation, even the generation before, it was really like, if you do a good job, you get a raise, you do a better job, you get a promotion, you do a better job, you get a training, you do a better job, you get a promotion. And I think that has really changed with the new generations as well. It's in the mindset of the people and of the younger people, and the combination of the changing environment of the organizations. So I think it's both.
Yeah, I would add that geography plays a role there too, in that there's different values in different parts of the world. And I'll give you two examples. In Brazil, or in Latin America, they place a high priority or high value on being very entrepreneurial. It's how their economy is working, and people that take risks and take chances are viewed almost in a hero type status. In places like India, it's incredibly important to work for a multinational company, and they place a lot of value on that. So you have to factor geography into that as well.
That's interesting. So does that mean an organization looking at their workforce should consider the dynamics of not just the generation, but mixing that with the geography? That sounds like a lot of effort in terms of working out what their recruitment strategy should be. Does that really pay off?
Yeah, it does. And what we've found is companies that do it best really take a global standard to their talent acquisition strategy, and then they afford for local differences based on regions of the world and where they're doing business or where they're trying to attract people. So you really do have to balance both out.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. Seeing the slide building up right now. So without having a magic ball, which allows us to predict the future, we recognize that the workforce of many organizations is changing rapidly. If you look at the 20th century, the contingent part of the overall workforce was mainly fixed employees working directly for the company, and temporary workers were really rare and hired only for a short period to replace someone on maternity leave or sick leave or add some extra support for a project. It's clear that temporary work has become a strategic instrument to manage the volatility in customer demand in global economies. Nowadays, we see that temp labor and contingent workers, including consultants, freelancers, and independent contracts, are becoming a bigger part of the overall workforce of companies. These changes are driven by decreasing tenure of employees, the need for particular skills within an organization for a certain period of time, and also the need for organizations to be competitive in the global market. I think there are clear reasons why contingent labor has grown over the last years, and as I said, it's the average tenure of employees decreasing. Lifelong employment no longer exists, as I explained before. Organizations need to react quickly to the demand and require specific skills for a short period of time. We also see that offshoring and outsourcing of non-core activities has become mainstream in order to stay competitive, and there are many more reasons I could think of. But you see the significant change coming from the 20th century into the 21st century. And predictions go further. And if you look at, for example, recent studies, there are predictions out there that by 2020, 50% of the U.S. labor workforce will actually be independent contractors. So we see a significant change happening within large organizations in different regions. And it also means that there's more complexity within the organizations to manage that part of the workforce. Any thoughts, Dave?
Yeah, I think you also have to look at the other side of the equation there as well. We talked about it a little bit when we were talking through the generations, but people look at work differently today than they did years ago. People are more loyal to their networks and their skills than they are to their organizations. So when you're looking at why contingent labor is growing, organizations are demanding it, but the new generation of worker is also demanding it. They want to work in different environments. They want to have different experiences. They want to have different rules to the workplace. And they're not afraid to make those changes because they're loyal to themselves, their networks of people, and their skills, not necessarily the organization that they're representing at that time.
Right. Rakesh, we actually want to do a poll question here. And what we really want to know from the audience today that is attending this webinar is also trying to see what your organization is actually doing this. And what we actually want to know from you is actually, do you know the percentage of your overall workforce that is actually contingent? So with contingent, I mean temporary staff, contractors, statement of work employees or resources, anything that's actually not on your payroll and works at your premises, basically. And we would really like to know if that's less than 5% of your total workforce, if that's between 5 to 10%, whether it's between 10 to 15% or even more than 15%. And we would really like to know what your organization looks like today. And with the results, we can actually see, perhaps in different industries, different figures as well. So please go ahead and fill out the question, and we'll pull up the results in a minute when everyone has submitted their votes. And we'll have a look at that to see what most organizations have in terms of contingent labor and contingent workforce overall. Okay, so that's pretty consistent with, actually very much alike. So well, we see less than 5%, 5 to 10, 10 to 50%, all the same percentages, and actually significant part, more than or at least half of the webinar attendance, they actually said it's more than 15%. And one comment I would like to make on this is actually that we see these percentages actually vary per organization and per industry. If you look at the IT, ICT, or technology industries, we see 20% and upwards actually within organizations, so some of even up to 30%. We also see that some of the automotive industries, that's a big user of contingent labor. And there are also some industries that are actually low on contingent labor, maybe thinking of fast-moving consumer goods and those kind of industries where we see that it's a little bit less. And obviously there are a lot of companies in the middle. So great information, and thank you for submitting that information on this webinar.
I think it's also interesting in that the visibility that people have into their organization's total workforce has grown over the years, and is becoming more and more clear that there's all kinds of non-employee workers doing very important work in a lot of organizations. And it was classified in the question if it's SOW or independent contractor or contingent labor. Companies are looking at it as our full-time workforce and then our non-employed workforce, and that's also causing the numbers to grow. And so when you look at the prediction Ronald mentioned, by 2020, half of all workers will be contingent. You have to factor that in as well.
Okay, move on to the next slide. And what we actually want to show you here as well, and it's actually helpful to see that you realize your organization have a large part of contingent workforce. But when we look at how organizations acquire their temporary staff, we can safely state that most organizations in the 1980s were really acquiring temporary staffing services on a decentralized structure, a decentralized manner. Each hiring manager had actually direct contact with local agencies, and organizations did not have any resources nor any information systems to capture all of their contingent labor spent. Now, together with the consolidation of the staffing and recruitment industries in the 1980s and the development of corporate procurement organizations, most of the multinational organizations actually started to look differently to how they would procure temporary staff. We saw during those years procurement getting more involved, and large organizations actually started to consolidate the temporary labor spent and introduce preferred suppliers in order to maximize their volumes and drive cost savings. This period was mainly about getting visibility into this category of spend and consolidate a reduced number of suppliers. And during those years, most organizations had internal staff to manage the program themselves, and it was all about getting things done. I think you recognize that from the old days, Dave.
Absolutely. That's kind of how we all started, right?
So when we then shift over to the 1990s, on the next slide, as of the late 1990s and the beginning of 2000, organizations realized that centralizing procurement of temporary labor would bring them more benefits, and large international staffing suppliers were providing additional services through their so-called master vendor or in-house solutions. we really saw the movement from decentralized going to centralized during those years. And instead of having internal employees and teams looking after temporary workers, large organizations realized that managing contingent workers is actually not a core activity, or was not a core activity for them. At the same time, large staffing suppliers were looking to get more spend and turnover by increasing the market share. So you got the procurement squeeze in there. They consolidate the spend. They're reducing pricing or margins. So they want to obviously, have less suppliers in order to take a little bit bigger piece of the cake. During these years, we witnessed the growth of master vendor and in-house, or so-called vendor on-premises models, VOP models, where contingent workforce programs were managed by large staffing suppliers. Having their staff working directly on premises made the process more efficient and enabled them to get their hands on all of the customer spend. Well, although customers had benefits too, well, they outsourced their non-core activities and had staffing agencies manage the induction, administration, planning. They also had a lot of invoice consolidation for them, and it also meant that a lot of the organizations got more dependent on one or two or less suppliers, and this era was really about doing things better.
Yeah, this was really, when the functional aspect of contingent labor started to shift fundamentally, in that it wasn't just the temporary services, administrative type roles that were being looked at from a contingent labor standpoint. It started, the engineering boom and the IT boom and the professional office boom. So as companies started to make that shift to use contingent labor more strategically, their spend started to grow. And their spend started to grow, organizations said we need to pay attention to the spend and start to maximize the value. So that's really where that shift started.
Thanks. So we now move over to the 21st century on the next slide. After what I would call a highly successful period of master vendor in-house solutions for large staffing companies, which is still very common in Europe, customers noticed that they became highly dependent on one particular supplier. We also saw that emerging technologies and the rise of so-called vendor management systems, VMSs, was becoming popular in the United States. And it made it actually possible to have the entire end-to-end process of acquiring and managing contingent staffing services online. And this created for most of the organizations more visibility, more transparency, more accountability. Now, I can tell you from a staffing supplier point of view, at first it was really a shock, because it also showed more transparency into pricing, and it also showed the added value that staffing suppliers need to bring. It also ended up with having more pressure on processes and making sure that you're the first ones to deliver. And the vendor management systems, which are being used today, they've been developed over the years and contributed to the growth of what we call neutral managed services, or MSP programs. And for those not familiar with it, this is when a third party manages the whole end-to-end acquisition of contingent labor on behalf of an organization without actually supplying themselves, or maybe just a small part of the contingent labor workforce. Especially over the last years, we've seen that the organizations are changing the workforce strategies, knowing that the skilled talent they need is getting scarcer by the day. Now, putting your faith in the hands of one supplier may be a risky situation now, but also in the future. Our clients also understand that they need to attract and acquire talent from different talent pools, and they recognize the need for a more what we call holistic approach when it comes to contingent workforce management, or some actually refer to it as a total talent management solution, and we also like to call it that. Contingent labor is no longer the admin clerical or blue-collar temporary spend. Nowadays, IT departments rely on offshore labor. They rely on independent contractors, free agents, and SOW resources. Hence, why large organizations are now busy with developing and deploying an overall solution instead of the siloed approach which we saw before and which was successful for many years. But I think nowadays, with more scarcity, more pressure on costs, using different kinds of labor, risk mitigation, all these things come into play, and we recognize that this age is all about doing better things, and more organizations recognize that having the right talent at the right time gives them an advantage over their competitors. So on this slide, as leader in our industry, we've developed the contingent workforce maturity model, which has now been copied by many of our competitors, and it's also being used by other organizations to show the development of our industry as a whole. As explained in the previous slide, the decentralized model of contingent labor acquisition, which happened in the 1980s by large organizations, you see that on the left side. But actually, due to the nature of businesses, of organizations, or company structures, some organizations still have a decentralized model. A large number of companies have shifted from a decentralized model and transforming into phase 2, phase 3, and phase 4, and MSP. And those companies that started using this model years ago are now ready to deploy even phase 5 or phase 6, which is really about total talent acquisition management or a global TTAM solution. Since we call it our maturity model, it also shows the maturity of the organizations acquiring contingent labor. Often companies believe that they can easily go from the left, phase 1, up to phase 5 or phase 6 immediately. But the jump and the required organization change may prove to be very difficult or complex. Going from one phase to another also requires change, but this is often easy and more feasible to achieve over a short period of time. Hence why we recommend our customers to assess their state of affairs and the current state of their workforce program and the workforce strategy, together with Allegis Group Services, to make certain what is needed in terms of change management, organizational culture, governance, technology platform, etc., etc. So the market maturity also plays an important role here, but the level of complexity is increasing with each phase, and organizations need to be aware of that. So we see this on the global level as well. We see highly developed economies, being very receptive and adapting to the MSP and the other models. In other parts of the world, we see that they're just getting started on temporary labor, and we see that there's a lot of variation in the regions. And I know, Dave, you've been recently in LATAM, so maybe you could share your thoughts on this, going from new emerging economies.
Sure, and it really differs country by country. There's some countries where temporary staffing really hasn't taken hold yet due to government regulations and how people view employment over there, and then other countries where it's you're kind of at that five or six type phase. What I would say overall is it's really interesting. It's moved from I have to fill a need as quickly as possible, so we're going to use a temporary agency, to the question being, I have to make sure that my company is aligned the right way to find the best talent overall, which really is that 5 or 6, and that's kind of how the market has matured, and how the solutions have matured. The other thing that I would say is it's become more and more clear that you really need cross-functional leadership and cross-functional sponsorship to make sure that you're aligned with the best talent, whether it's contingent or full-time. So what used to be very procurement-driven initiatives in phase 2 or phase 3 have really become total team efforts, in that you have talent acquisition or HR, procurement, finance, legal, IT, all working in concert to make sure that they're working on developing the right solution to meet their organization's needs.
So Dave and Ronald, we've got a question just around this maturity of the market in relation to a particular organization. Say they were starting at phase 1 and decentralized. What do you think is the typical timeline for them as an organization to get from stage 1 to stage 5 or 6? How long do you think that takes from a time frame perspective?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Rakesh. One of the things that we've found, and we've been certainly lucky to align ourselves with customers that feel the same way, is that there really isn't a big bang approach to talent acquisition and MSP and RPO. It's really important to look at what your future strategy is, whether it's global expansion, moving into a different discipline, taking on services procurement or statement of work type spend. It's very important. I don't want to say it's easy, but it should be expected that an MSP or an RPO is going to add value to an organization in year 1 and year 2, because it's new, it's exciting, it can potentially bring in cost savings and risk mitigation and all those things. Year 3, year 4, year 5, you do need to look at, okay, where else can we go in the organization? Where else can we add value? We've got a great story to tell. We've figured out change management in your organization. We've become that trusted advisor and that resource to you. So it's really important to look at what the expansion strategy is. We've had customers that, started at, they had $10 million in contingent labor spend that today are running, globally $150, $200 million through our program over the course of 6 or 7 years. We've also had customers that took a very detailed roadmap approach that started at, several $100 million in spend, and every year are bringing on 6 or 8 countries. So you have to really look at what's important to your organization, where can you have the highest impact, what can you handle from a change management standpoint, because there is change involved and you need local resources to really drive the message, and then obviously capacity of your partners as well. So it really is an across-the-board answer, and I apologize for that, but it's really the truth. It really depends on what's going on in your organization and where your sponsorship lies.
Yeah, and I don't want to build or repeat on that, but it's really it depends. Is the basic answer. If we can give any advice or tips, to organizations, look at what you can digest and what you can work on, because going from decentralized to a total talent acquisition management solution, it doesn't have to go for your whole organization, and maybe you start up with the bits and pieces and do a pilot with, maybe just start with your IT spend, or start with your, some other spend that you have in other areas. Build the experience and make sure that you got a success story there, and take the lessons learned. And what you typically see, and what we've seen with large customers, when we did the first implementation, it took several months. To be honest, it took maybe 3 to 6 months. But when you do the second program or the second project, the expansion, it's already down to 2 months, and by the third and the fourth program you add to it, is less than a month. So it's really about bringing the spend under control, getting a grip of things, and really focus on the areas you can really get some quick benefits on, and that can bring in the real results. And from that moment on, you can actually build throughout your organization, and it can go really fast.
Excellent. Thank you, guys. That's really useful. Just as a time check, we've got about 15 minutes of the call remaining. So for the audience, if you do have any questions, any more questions, then please feel free to keep them coming, and we'll try and get as many of those answered as possible.
Okay. Good for the time check. I'll speed up a little bit on the next slide. So if you go to the next slide. As we saw in the maturity model, I would like to make some comments about the change in workforce, and it also applies for contingent workforce. And we already mentioned that a couple of times, I think, today in this webinar. Although temporary labor was somewhat insignificant years ago, it's completely changed over the last few years for many organizations. And the contingent workforce has become a strategic part of the overall workforce, but also consists of many different types of contingent workers. Each category has its own specific characteristics, and in order to give an idea of what I'm talking about, I'd like to give you some examples of the contingent workforce categories we see in customer organizations, going from temporary workers, light industrial, admin clerical, going through project statement of work where it's all about deliverables, time and materials, or fixed price, and even including graduate and interns. And if you go to the next slide, if you look at the complexity of the contingent workforce characteristics, you also see that the modern contingent workforce, as it looks, it's difficult to put a cookie cutter or one-size-fits-all approach to manage all contingent staff, and that actually will not work for a lot of organizations. If you look at the characteristics of these categories, there are many differences between the different contingent worker categories. Now, try to explain this to a procurement director or a procurement department that is tasked with saving costs and trying to drive out the added value of a diversified approach. It's really hard, and the category approach has worked very well over the years to maximize the cost savings. Let's say you focus on temporary agency workers first, and you squeeze that, then you move on to the next category and the next category. It's really worked well over the years, but if you look at the changing economic conditions, the holistic approach or the total talent management solution, something needs to change. And this is one of the reasons for the success of Allegis Group Services as an organization, because we know how to address this big spend, often the biggest spend, within organizations is really about workforce and about personnel and staff. And we know how to manage this whole contingent workforce efficiently, looking at different categories, different needs, and also different processes that we need to manage on behalf of our customers. And any thoughts, Dave, on this?
Just based on time, Ronald, let's move on to the next slide.
Okay.
So at Allegis Group Services, we believe that having the right talent, the right time for the right price, it will make organizations more successful than your competitors. And organizations that have designed and deployed a contingent workforce strategy and solution seem to achieve generally better company results in choosing the right contingent workforce management partner really plays an important role. Any organization looking for a strong and long-term strategic partner, well, they need to find this partner based on a number of criteria. In terms of quality, the partner of choice needs to be an expert in what they do, and they understand also the markets that they operate in. We know that labor legislation can be cumbersome, particularly in Europe and LATAM, where temporary workers often have similar rights equally as fixed employees. Understanding the market also implies knowing the suppliers in a particular market and also the ability to partner with those suppliers in order to build a strong supply chain network for our customers. In terms of control, the partner of choice should function as a single point of contact for all types of contingent labor. This automatically will create more transparency, more visibility, and in what spend is acquired, where it is acquired, with whom it is acquired, and by whom it is acquired. And this visibility will certainly drive cost savings through active bill rate management, leveraging correct job functions and requirements, and last but not least, consolidate suppliers and increasing efficiency through streamlined processes. All of this supported by a superior vendor management system, VMS, will bring many benefits to organizations who spend a lot on their contingent workforce, especially when we looked at the poll that 50% of the companies spend 50% or more than 15% of their workforce is already contingent labor. Besides increasing quality and getting more control, your partner of choice needs to manage several processes on behalf of your organization and actually should drive process and legal compliance as well. Eventually, that selected contingent workforce partner will be able to consult hiring managers, consult your organization to what type of contingent worker is most beneficial for the hiring manager in terms of compliance, cost, and quality. And this is what you should expect when you engage with a contingent workforce partner. So that's a lot of information we're bringing together today in the growth of contingent workforce, and we actually wanted to show you what happened over the years, what the developments are within our industry. What we do want to bring across today is actually, not showing the horror scenario here with having an empty office, but we do know that predictions are out there that by 2030 we need 25 million additional workers in the U.S. And due to the globalization and the aging workforce, we may even need 45 million additional workers within the EMEA region. So it shows that talent acquisition, total talent management is really important for large organizations, and organizations need to be ready for what we call the talent tornado that's coming with contingent workers. They need contingent workers, to deal with the economic volatility, and we do believe that talent is one of the biggest differentiator for the organizations, to have the right talent at the right time, the right cost, at the right place.
Yeah, it's really it's amazing when you watch it from, as I said earlier, both sides of the equation, in that companies are looking to limit their legacy costs in regards to who's doing the work for them. They're looking to specialize and get specialty skill sets in very high cost areas of the organization, like IT and professional and engineering, and the worker themselves are looking to find new ways of working and looking for new experiences. So it really has become the perfect storm, and why contingent workforce has grown so much, and really at the end of the day, why it's incredibly important for your organization to look at that as not a cost center, but from a strategic standpoint, in that who's working in my facilities, what's the value that I'm receiving for them, and how can I ensure that we look at it from a strategic value standpoint moving forward. The workers looking at it saying, I really want to work in different environments and enjoy different environments and learn new things, and I'm very loyal to my skill set and my network, not so much to the organization anymore. So it's really important to look at. It's really important to have a strategy around, and thankfully that's what Ronald and I do.
Yeah. Before we open up the floor for any more questions, we also have the last poll question for our attendants and people on the webinar today. And actually, what we also want to learn from you today is, besides the question that we asked before, is how is your organization going to deal with current and future workforce challenges? And you can select one of the answers here below, and it ranges from the first answer: our organization does not have any workforce challenges, which I would hardly believe if anyone would answer that question, but I don't want to steer you in that direction. What about the second answer, about to review a workforce strategy in the next 6 to 12 months from now? Or we've already started to review a workforce strategy, or maybe your organization already deployed a new strategy over the last few months because of the changes in the economy or change in the workforce. So I'm looking forward to seeing your answers today and from our attendees to see where your organization is, and if you're a, let's say, traditional organization or a transformational organization, what is your organization dealing with, and how they're going to deal with it. Oh, great, there's the poll results. Okay, so I think I already steered everyone away from the first answer. Shows that some of you already started to do, or at least think about it, but a lot of that already started to review the workforce strategy. So okay, that's actually significant, and I think it's also in line with our expectation. We know there's a lot of challenges going on, and I'm actually worried or concerned. Let's put it, I don't know the right term here, but only 50% actually doing a new deployed strategy over the last few months. So it seems that everybody is already thinking about it, but only 50% only started with it. So interesting to see this results. And any thoughts here, Dave?
Yeah, it is very interesting to see these results. It's interesting. It would be interesting, and I know we won't know, but those who are reviewing their workforce strategy, might want to consider looking at more of a total talent strategy than just a contingent strategy or an RPO strategy, because one of the things that we've found and we've talked about is there's value in looking at talent without looking at it in buckets. So you look at who's doing outsourced service contracts for you today, and who's recruiting the best full-time talent for you today, and which suppliers you're using from a contingent standpoint today, and you marry all that up, and you can get a very clear picture of what's going on in your organization. And there's opportunities there, whether it's through employer branding opportunities, looking at how you're managing your social media to attract the right people, the story your suppliers are telling your contingent laborers on your behalf. The other thing that I would look at is, I'll give you an example. For a finance company, last year we hired 16,000 people. And to reach those 16,000 people and bring them on board, we touched 6.8 million people. All 6.8 million people are potential customers of our customer. So you want to manage the candidate experience, whether it's contingent, whether it's full-time, the right way, because that really does have an impact on your brand and your potential customers. So you want to look at it, again, a couple different ways.
Absolutely. Rakesh, are there any questions from the audience?
Yeah, just one question around organizational culture and how it relates to your talent strategy. How do you make sure that you don't just have a boilerplate solution, is the question, and you relate your strategy to the culture of the organization? And how important is that?
It's probably the most important piece of it. Even though we are a separate organization, it's incredibly important to understand your customers, and that's kind of business speak 101, so I apologize for it, but I really do mean it. It's probably the most important piece, and when you look at it, you have to look at it from a change management standpoint. What's going to work well in your organization? You have to look at it from an overall experience standpoint. What's it like to work within the walls of your organization? You have to look at it from a management standpoint in that, how will I be managed day to day within the organization, and kind of the what's in it for me piece. So that again ties right back into the experience, the employer branding, and the overall strategy around bringing the best talent into your organization. You never want to oversell what it's like to work within the walls of a company, because then your first-time quality rates go down. So you have to manage that with metrics and make sure that your recruiters are doing a great job attracting the right talent, the passive talent, but they're also, the organization's also living up to how that position is described to them.
And that's a good answer. And I guess just from my perspective, a question from me, in terms of common pitfalls, it sounds like 62% of our audience are currently reviewing their workforce strategy. If I was to ask about the top 2 or 3 problems or challenges that organizations have in that stage, what would you give them as tips to avoid those same pitfalls?
Sure. The first one, I would say the most important piece is having the right level of executive sponsorship and making that sponsorship cross-functional within your organization. So these decisions cannot and should not be made in a bucket, if you will. A lot of times procurement will lead this initiative, but what we find great companies doing is making sure that it's inclusive of HR, talent acquisition, and finance and IT, so that everybody can design the solution that's going to meet the overall organization's needs. The second tip, I guess I would say, is if you're a global organization and you're looking at deploying a global solution, it's a great idea. The key is you need to build a global standard and then afford for, design for, and implement for the local changes. So, one of our customers, has a roadmap that they want to get completely global within 3 years. So we deployed 6 countries last year, and we're deploying 8 countries this year and 10 countries the following year. And what they've done a great job of, and I think what we've done a great job of, is making sure that there's consistency in the process, that we're very, very tied to the global standard, but we're not so inflexible that we can't change for the local differences that are needed, and whether that's cultural differences, whether that's technology differences, or simply the needs of the organization, we can afford for those local differences. Ronald, anything to add?
No, I think Dave gave the perfect answer. It's really about putting the governance structure in place, putting a realistic scope in place, and maybe additionally put in a realistic time planning and expectations in place, because obviously it's often these kind of outsourcing services and outsourcing solutions are typically very much cost driven. Eventually they all deliver the results and the costs, but sometimes the pressure is an organization to deliver cost savings within a week or a month or a period, which is not really feasible. It's I always try to refer to it, and maybe it's a wrong allergy, but I'm always saying that it takes 9 months to make a baby. Even if you put 2 women in, it still takes 9 months. So sometimes you just need to build the results, and things will come eventually. But you have to have some patience and realistic time planning and realistic expectations into your programs.
Fantastic. Well, Ronald and Dave, thank you very much for your input and content, and for the tips as well, to help us understand really what talent strategy is and how the market is progressing. We're coming to the close of the session. I think the last slide is really just for us to say a big thank you to all of the audience for joining. And this website was sponsored by Allegis Group Services in conjunction with the Outsourcing Institute. David, I don't know if you had any closing words to close off the session. I just want to say a big thank you to Dave and Ronald.
Thank you, everybody. We really enjoyed the conversation. Rakesh, thanks so much for doing a great job moderating it. And David, we appreciate the opportunity to speak on behalf of the Outsourcing Institute today. And just wanted to say thanks to everybody.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks to Rakesh, Dave, and Ronald for the presentation on behalf of the Outsourcing Institute. And thank you to everybody listening in. I hope you all have a great day. Thank you.
Bye now.
Bye.